Hey class, hope you're having a good day today. By the time you see this video, it should be tomorrow, which means that it would be Tuesday, not Monday. I'm recording this Monday night. Yes, Luna, thank you for sitting in my paper. Your pain. I hope you know that. Some of you requested that I read the book to you so you could just follow along. Some of you didn't grab your books because you either didn't get my message, didn't see it before you left Friday, or you just plain forgot, or you just didn't feel like coming up and getting it, which if you didn't feel like coming up and get it, shame on you. Anyway, not that it really matters because you guys have access to your online book. I know some of you have been having login issues, and some of you have been sick, and I totally get it. So I'm just because I have a good chunk of people who have already requested I do a video, I'm just going to do a video anyway. If you choose to read the book on your own, that is perfectly fine. If you want to use the online book and use the read along option and the highlighted text option, just make sure that when you are on HMH that you click when you open the ebook, there will be a more tab. And you need to click that and make sure that the audio and the highlight text is on. If it's not on, it won't work. So make sure you do that. Also, make sure you're in Module D. I did close off Module B and C just to be safe, so that way you guys don't accidentally open the wrong book and read a chapter that we've already read. So that being said, you should only have access to Module D at this point, and there are 3 units in Module D. So make sure that you're in the correct unit. We are in Unit number 1. And we are in lesson number 1. So we are reading pages 1 through 10 today. I'm going to read it. I'm going to go through it kind of quickly. You do need to answer the questions, but you don't need to answer the unit opener questions. And then I will go over what the worksheet looks like, though Luna is currently sitting on it, and I'm sure it's all wrinkled. So, this is what the page should look like if you were following along online or in your book, your own book. This is the unit opener. This is page 1. So, the history of the Earth is what the title of this unit is called. So this image shows an artist's impression of what early Earth would have looked like. So obviously a million years after this, life would have formed on this planet. This planet would look very differently. But this is what our planet, they think, looked like before life started on here. It would have been very hot, lots of lava, lots of rock, lots of volcanoes. Very early formation. There wouldn't have been water quite yet. That would all come later. So, the history of life on Earth is a fascinating mystery, complete with intriguing plants and animals and life and death struggles. Earth has been around for a very long time, 4.6 billion years. So how do we know so much about the history of life on Earth? In this unit, you will learn how scientists use evidence found in fossils and rocks, along with an understanding of natural processes and scientific principles, to unravel this extraordinary mystery. So if you turn the page, here are the unit opener questions. If you would like to fill those in, you are more than welcome to. They're just questions to help you guide you along on what you should be learning about in this chapter, things that you should be understanding as we go through this unit. So you are more than welcome to fill them out. It's not a requirement. I'm not going to go over these. I'm not doing these, but if you would like to, go for it. This is kind of like you can fill it in at your own. It might be beneficial to help with studying. It might not. If you don't choose to do it, it's perfectly fine. I'm not grading it. That being said, I will release a study guide sometime this week. I don't know if it will be tomorrow, if it will be Wednesday, but everybody will get an online copy of the study guide at some point this week. It will just kind of depend on what the week looks like in this. We're rolling with the punches with this whole not being in school thing. So this is new for you and newer for me. So, looking on page 3, you should see three organisms that have wings: a dragonfly, a hummingbird, and a crane. So, this is a unit starter, comparing anatomical structures. One way that scientists study relationships among organisms is to look for anatomical similarities that they share. An organism's anatomy includes its physical features. So, like, how you look is what your anatomy is. We can talk about like the anatomy of a body, and then that would be like looking at what your heart looks like, your lungs look like, and what your bones look like. That all counts for as anatomy. Yes, your organs are inside of you, hopefully. I really hope your organs are inside of you because that's where they should be. But when we talk about like human anatomy, we are studying like all the structures that are physically in your body that make you up as a person, that make you different from other living things. It's kind of what anatomy is looking at. So physical features, not just on the outside sometimes, but sometimes it's on the inside too. So for example, there are 3 organisms that all have wings here. They're all anatomically different, even though they all have wings. So you need to use the photos to answer the following question. So you have a dragonfly, which is resting on a branch. You notice the structure of its wings. You have a green-crowned brilliant hummingbird that lands on a flower in Ecuador, and the sandhill crane that extends its wings to land in a field in New Mexico. So then the question asks you here, study the wing structure of the organisms. The wings of the hummingbird are more similar to the wings of the crane or of the dragonfly. So you have the crane down here and the dragonfly here and the hummingbird here. So which one is it most closely related to? Well, if you would look at the pictures, you notice that this is an insect, and this insect has 4 wings. It's also going to have a segmented body. You can't really tell that in this picture, but I can tell you that it's an insect, so it has a segmented body. The hummingbird is going to be made out of hollow bones. It's also only going to have 2 wings covered in feathers. This crane is also a bird, so it's going to have hollow bones, and it's going to have feathers and 2 wings. So when this question asks you which one is it most closely related to, the answer would be the crane. So please circle crane on your page. Or if you're on the online one, please select crane and submit. So these two are more closely related because they're both birds, so they're closer on the evolutionary tree. And then the last question asks you, based on the anatomical similarities, the hummingbird is likely more or less closely related to the crane than the dragonfly. And the answer would be, it is more likely related to the dragonfly. They are going to be closer on the evolutionary tree than these two are going to be. And we've talked about evolution. We've had this discussion several times in class. And evolution is a theory, but theories in science are backed by evidence that we've collected. And so we have evidence looking at the structure of this bird and evidence of the structure of this bird that if you would look at their bones really closely, you would see a lot of similarities. And that tells us that at some point in history, these two either had the same ancestor or an ancestor or ancestors that were related to each other. And we'll talk about that more when we get back to school, when and if. And that evolutionary... Not if, I guess. We're going back next Tuesday. Anyway, but when we get back to class, I will show you my evolutionary chart, and that shows you theoretically how everything is interconnected. It's not going to give you specific organisms like, oh, the hummingbird and the crane descended from this animal. It's not going to tell you that. It's just going to tell you what kind of pathways each organism would have taken and about when these organisms started popping up and like how close related we are to specific organisms. So like I've talked about in class, the myth with evolution is that we're monkeys. We're not monkeys. Humans aren't monkeys. We're primates. We belong to the family of primates because we walk upright, and we have opposable thumbs. And monkeys can walk upright and have opposable thumbs. Also, orangutans and apes can do the same thing. We're all primates, which means we all come from the same family because we have similar features, which means at some point in time, way back in our history, a long, long time ago, we shared a common ancestor. We had an ancestor that was the same or very closely related to each other. And like I talked about, some event happened that separated those ancestors, and then each one evolved into what we have today, common humans and like apes and monkeys you see in a zoo. So we're not monkeys. But these two would be more closely related than these two would be because these two have more in common. Obviously, a crane is bigger, so there's still going to be differences between the two. This one's darkly colored, this one's lightly colored. They're going to have different diets, but these two are most closely related than this insect is to the bird. So, turn the page. Now I gotta turn 10 of them. Alright. So page 4, we're starting lesson 1. So this is talking about the fossil record. So about 125 million years ago, this mosquito got stuck in tree sap and in sticky tree sap and would have died. So over time, the sap would harden around the insect, forming amber, which preserved the mosquito's body. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain how fossil data can be used to provide evidence of the history of life on Earth. So fossils are kind of like a physical data bank of what things would have looked like back in time. And because it's literally like frozen, preserved moments of time. So can you explain it? We're on page 5 now. So how can fossils help us learn about a whale that lived 40 million years ago? So this model shows the whale Durodon atrox may have looked like when it was alive. So the model is based on data gathered from the fossils such as this in Whale Valley, Egypt. So this is what they found. This is what they generated on a computer. So what observations and inferences, I'm on question 1, from the fossils might have been used to build the computer model? Well, things like the length of the body. They could measure the distance between the bones, the length of the bones, and figure out like approximately how long this creature was going to be. They can tell that, it had flippers, so they can tell that it probably lived in the ocean, that it's going to have flippers, what those feet would have looked like, how many it would have had. It could tell you what the head structure is going to look like. There would be sockets of space in here because sometimes teeth don't get preserved. And so they can tell you that this organism probably did have teeth and approximately how long they are. Where if it had an eye and where those eyes would have been located on the skull. They can tell all of that and data from here in order to make this structure. So they would observe the limbs, they would observe the length of the body, and the inferences they could make is that this animal probably swam rather than walked. It probably lived in an ocean because it had flippers. So those are the things. That's how you use the information that you're given. You make observations, and then you tell me, like, then scientists would tell you what they think would happen. That's making an inference. So what similarities and differences do you observe between the fossil remains and the computer model of the whale? So the similarities would be like they both have flippers. They both have a spine. They both would have had eyes. They both probably would have had teeth. The length would be similar. The differences that you wouldn't be able to tell is you wouldn't be able to tell like what those eyes necessarily would have been shaped like, what the pupils would have looked like, if they would have been slit, if they would have been rounded, if they would have taken up the entire eyeball, what color the skin would have been, how much skin it had, how much it would have weighed, how much blubber or fat it would have had to protect itself from coldness in the water, how fast it would have swam, how sharp its teeth would have been. You might not be able to tell from the skeleton how many teeth it would have had, if there was more than one row, kind of like sharks have, if there would only been a few, if they were molars, kind of like the back of your mouth, or if they're more like canines where they were sharp and pointed. You wouldn't be able to tell those things from this fossil unless you had those teeth or that skin left over, and that doesn't typically get preserved. So they look at the skeleton, they make guesses to what it kind of would have looked like. But this isn't an exact representation because nobody knows because there's not a living one. So turn the page. So now we're on exploration 1. Which is what you were supposed to read today. So we know a lot about the history of life on Earth from studying fossils. Fossils are the remains of or traces of once living organisms. Fossils form when specific conditions occur that preserve an organism's remains. In most cases, an organism's remains are eaten, scattered, dissolved by water, or decomposed before they can be preserved. So how fossils can form. The most common fossils formed when the remains of dead animals were covered by sediment. Usually only the hard parts of the animal are fossilized, but sometimes the soft parts can be fossilized, but it's very rare. So mostly you're going to get bone, some teeth, shells. Those are going to be commonly preserved, but you're not going to see like organs and skin and muscle tissue. Cartilage sometimes gets preserved just because it's not bone, but it's harder. That's what sharks are made out of. Skeletons are made out of. It's not an actual skeleton. So sometimes that gets preserved, but not always. So in this picture, this is how most common fossils are formed, are when the dead animals are, covered in sediment. So that walks you through this process. If you're a Dorudon that is injured, it dies and falls to the ocean floor. The ocean floor has currents, so it's going to cover that body with sediment. Scavengers are going to come in and pick off all like the soft tissues, or it's just going to decompose, one of the two. And as over time, it will get covered with more and more sediment, and that sediment will build up until eventually hard rock is going to form because there's so much pressure at the bottom of the ocean depending on where this whale died. And just as the layers build up, they're going to stack on top of each other, which is going to create more pressure because you have more rock and dirt sitting on top of each other. So eventually it's going to fossilize, preserve, turn into rock, and it's going to preserve that organism. And then over time, the landscape's going to change depending on what the Earth decides to do, how the climate's changing, how the tectonic plates move. So eventually what was once ocean or a lake now became desert. And that rock that skeleton is now preserved in is now exposed to air and rainfall. And eventually erosion is going to take place. So water and wind are going to break down that rock into tiny little pieces, into dirt, and wash it away. And eventually that skeleton is going to be exposed. So that's typically how fossils are formed, but not always. So review the fossilization process in the diagram. Which of these conditions might prevent a dead organism from being preserved? You have A, being trapped in tree sap, B, being eaten or decomposing, C, being dissolved by water, or D, being buried by sediments. Well, D is not going to be a correct answer because sediments is how fossils are typically formed. So D is not a correct answer. Being buried by sediments isn't going to prevent it from being preserved. In fact, it's going to help it. Same thing with A. Being preserved in tree sap is going to help it be preserved because that's how amber is formed, is from tree sap. So B and C would be the correct answers. B, if too much of it is eaten or decomposed before it can be preserved, then it won't be preserved, obviously. So if too many animals eat the tissues or eat the bone and it dissolves, breaks down too much, there's not enough material left to save, that it won't fossilize. And then being dissolved by water, obviously same thing as B. If there's not enough material to fossilize, it won't fossilize. So ways fossils can form. It is rare for an organism's remains to form a fossil. Many processes can prevent fossil formation. The remains of less than 1% of all the species that ever lived fossilize. Fossils form most often when an organism's remains are quickly buried in sediment. That's why most fossils are found in sedimentary rock. Quick burial by sediment occurs more often in rivers, lakes, and oceans that carry dirt from one place to another than it does on land. Therefore, water-dwelling animals are usually the ones that are most likely to be preserved, and then those that lived on land. So fossils may form from an organ's bones, teeth, or shells. They may also form from activity. Fossils of soft body animals like jellyfish are rare, but they do exist. Proteins and genetic material can also fossilize. For example, scientists identified certain cell structures in fossilized feathers that help them determine the color of the feathers. So sometimes something as small as a piece of DNA can get fossilized, and you can actually tell a lot from a single strand of DNA, like how long the feathers would have been, what color they would have been. It could tell you kind of what the organism was going to look like. It might even give you gender depending on how long the strand of DNA is. So all that is beneficial. So then on page 7 are the different types of fossils in this chart. So we're going to go through the list top to bottom. So you have your pre-mineralized fossils. So pre-mineralization happens when an organism's tissues are replaced by nutrients or minerals in the water. So basically the bone doesn't exist anymore, but the nutrients like that absorbed into the bone are left behind. So it basically leaves an impression of what the organism looked like. So you're not actually getting the bones, but you're getting the minerals that were in the bones left behind. So you still can see what it looked like, what the bones would have looked like had they been preserved, but they're not actually there. And then carbonized fossils are formed when organisms, like typically these are plants because they have more carbon, is quickly buried and flattened by the enormous pressure of sediments above it. And basically what happens is that pressure squeezes out all the nitrogen and the oxygen and the hydrogen that lives in the plant, and all that's left behind is the carbon. And carbon is black, usually in its solid form, and so it just leaves this dark black impression of what that plant would have looked like. This is pretty common for plant fossils. This is usually our most common type of fossils found for plants. And then amber fossils, so basically like this spider, it gets stuck in tree sap. That tree sap hardens into amber over time, and then you have a perfectly preserved specimen. It'd be nice if all of our fossils could be preserved in amber, because then we could actually tell what they look like, but dinosaurs and most organisms are way too big to be preserved by tree sap. But things like insects, that's pretty common to find. Fossils aren't common, but when we do find fossils of insects, it's usually they're preserved in amber or they're preserved in tar. Tar is kind of similar to the amber. It's asphalt. That's what we make roads out of. So they get stuck in that sticky tar-like substance. It hardens into asphalt, into hard rock, and that organism then gets preserved in that rock. Cast and mold fossils. So basically an organism got stuck in like some mud. The organism eventually decomposes and is no longer left behind. Something fills the cavity that the organism left behind, the impression, and forms basically a fake copy of that organism, and that's usually what we find. This is common with shell type organisms, so you can see like imprints of shells left behind. I have some of these in my classroom actually that we can look at when we get back. You have trace fossils. Trace fossils are the type of fossils we talk about when you find like movement. They're fossils that are a record of the activity of the organism. So like footprints are a good example. So these are dinosaur footprints that have been preserved. We talked about the tar, and then sometimes you get frozen remains. So talking about like mammoths they found this baby mammoth in a glacier. Otis the Iceman was also found in a glacier. So sometimes you get remains that get frozen in ice, and then you have pretty much the entire organism still. So it's not super common though. Like they said, most fossils are stuck in sediment. So if you turn the page, the last thing they talk about is the case study, the Morris Formation. So basically this map just shows you that in the entire world, you can see this is a picture of the United States actually, but in the entire world, this area in red is where most fossils in the entire world are found. So you got like Montana up here, you've got Colorado down here, and Wyoming, and South Dakota and North Dakota, and yeah, so you got all these states, and Nebraska, and you got all these states here. So the further in the red you are, the more likely you are to find a fossil, and the more likely you are to find a complete fossil, because rivers would have flown. This was all basically a wetland area, or it was a lot of lakes and rivers, and so this was covered in a lot of water. So this is where a lot of the fossils are preserved at. So like in Colorado, they found a ton of dinosaur bones, ton of dinosaur fossils. So you can actually go and like take tours and go down trails and look at all these fossils. And it's pretty cool. I've actually been there. So we found some in western South Dakota. That's common too. So the further inland you go, the more likely it is you are going to find a fossil. The further in you go, the more likely you are to find complete fossils, because rivers would have carried pieces of fossils from one location to another. So let's say you find a fossil up here, you might only find half of it, but then somebody might have found the other half way down here because a river would have carried it from one place to the other. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you never find the other half because it dissolved, it decomposed too much, and it got carried away, and it's gone. And sometimes you find complete skeletons all together. That doesn't always happen. So this is the area in the entire world where most fossils are found. So in the United States. On page 9 and 10 is your lab. You can either do it in the book, you can do the copy online. I made sure that you all could edit it. So if you are having troubles with that, just let me know. You can also answer the questions on another sheet of paper and just take a picture of it and send that to me. If you want to take a picture of your molds and of your castings, you can send that to me as well. Just upload everything to Google Docs. If you can't get it, or not Google Docs, upload everything to Google Classroom. If you are having trouble figuring that out, you can always email it to me as well. Either one is fine. It's not due until we get back Tuesday, but you will need to submit it somewhere on there because we obviously didn't do this in class, so I won't have the physical representations. If you are absolutely can't do it at home, you can always answer the questions and do the mold when you get back to school. You should be able to answer the questions without having to actually do the lab. The questions aren't super difficult if you think about it. So what you need to do is you need to have modeling clay. I also told you guys could use mud if you don't want to bring in mud from outside, which is perfectly fine. If you have flour and a little bit of water, you can make a dough. If you have Play-Doh, that would work. If you don't have anything, don't worry about it. And then, my nose itches. And then you need to have various items to form cast fossils. Basically, don't pick something super large. You don't want anything like bigger. You need to be able to have an object big enough that it leaves an impression, but not super big that it takes up your entire dough area, because you don't want to make like a huge amount of dough. So don't pick like super large objects. Pick like pennies or a pen cap, like things like that. Or a shell, if you have a shell. And then you need glue. So you need to take 2 or more items and press and that you want to fossilize, and then you need to take your clay or your dough and put it in and try to make it as flat as you possibly can. You do need to leave it thick enough so that way you can leave an impression in the dough when you put your objects in them. So you're going to push your items into your dough or into your clay, and then you're going to pull them out very gently so they leave behind an indent or an impression in your clay or dough. After you did that, you need to make sure that then you would answer question 3. So once you press the objects, what does the clay represent in this scenario, and what does the objects represent in this scenario when we talk about the process of fossilization? So that question is asking you, like, the clay represents one part of fossilization, the objects represent another part. What are those things? You need to tell me, like, what part of the fossilization process are they showing? And then 4, you would remove the objects from the clay. Like I said, try not to disturb the impressions around it. You don't want to ruin it. And then you need to step 5 is filling the mold with glue and letting it dry. You don't want to fill it with a ton of glue. You don't want to fill it to the brim because it's going to take a long time to dry. Glue does not dry quickly. So just letting you know, like, don't fill it to the brim. Just fill it enough so you can get at least a small little cast of it. When the glue is dried, peel it back. The dry glue should make a cast of your item. Should make like a fake model of your item. We just talked about cast molds. So exchange fossil casts with another group. I erased this part on your lab. I don't expect you to do that, but you should be able to tell me, make inferences about the items that you used to make your fossils. Like, why did you choose those objects? What about those objects made them good or bad casting materials? And then you need to tell me in step 8 exactly what you used in your mold. So if you used a pen cap for number 8, you should say pen cap. Okay. Number 9, what were you able to infer about the cast fossil you analyzed. So like, what was different? What was the same? Did your inferences correctly reflect the original object? So like, did it look like your original object? Were there slight differences? Why were there slight differences? Number 10, then, what about the fossilization process made it difficult to accurately or completely identify your original item? So like, if you were looking at if you fossilized a pen cap, what about the fossilization process would it make it difficult if you gave your object, your cast mold that you made, if you gave it to a classmate, what would make it hard for that classmate to determine what exactly you picked to make your mold out of? Like, if you used a pen cap, why would they not be able to tell that might be a pen cap? So what essentially went wrong with your cast molds? Because fossilization is not perfect. It's not going to preserve everything. So that's what you need to do on this worksheet. I've also left an attendance tracker on Classroom as well, Google Classroom. You just go in, you answer some questions about the reading today, which you found interesting. You need to write today's date and your name, and then it asks whether or not you like having a video or if you would prefer to just read on your own. Some of you chose, I've already made this video obviously based on some people's responses. Some people chose that, a good chunk of people chose the video. They prefer to have a video, and some of you chose to just read it on your own. But don't forget that your online book also has a read-along option, but you have to make sure that when you're in the ebook, you have to select there should be like a more option in one of the corners. You have to click that more and make sure audio is on and the highlight to text is on if you want to use that. And it will stop. So like, it will read, and then when you get to like questions or you get to like pictures, it will stop because the pictures have their own talk button on the side that you have to hit play on. And then questions don't have a play button usually. So if you get to a question, once you read the question, you have to answer it and then scroll down and then hit play again at the top, and it will continue reading for you. But it automatically stops when it comes to a picture or questions that are in the book. So just an FYI on that if you are using the follow along. If you would just rather listen to me talk and go through the lesson with you, that's perfectly fine too. So that is what I got. Make sure you get those things done. This fossil lab is not due until we come back on Wednesday for you Gold Day kids. My Black Day kids, we went over this before we left. So you guys know when it's due. Your biome projects, your biodiversity projects are not due until the Wednesday when we get back as well. So don't stress yourself about it. It's kind of nice because now you have an extra week to work on it and get it done. So there should be no excuses and there should be no late work because you guys have had 2 weeks to get it done now. So that being said, I will post a study guide at some point on Classroom either tomorrow, Tuesday, because it's Monday night now, or on Wednesday or sometime at the end of this week, whenever I get that done. So you will have it by Friday. I just can't guarantee it will be tomorrow. So, but you will all get a study guide on Classroom that you can edit and fill in as you go. And hopefully we will be back in school on Wednesday and we will go from there. So hopefully you guys are all enjoying your e-learning time at home, and hopefully you're staying healthy and being safe on your break through this week from being in your school building. So I am just hanging out with my pets. Theo's passed out. And Luna's curious. Yep, there you go. So that's Creator thinks she's a baby. Willow's asleep over there. So I'm just hanging out in here. This is obviously not my room. This is my child's room. So, but anyway, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me. Otherwise, and I will be available all day from 8 to 15, which is when our school would normally start, until 7:45, because that's when I get to work, and then till 3:30. After 3:30, I will check my email throughout the night just to see if any of you have questions, but I can't guarantee I will see your email right away or that I will respond to it until the next day at the following time, because after 3:30 is when I'm off work and I'm at home taking care of my baby. So if you have questions, feel free to email me, leave a comment on Classroom. That's perfectly fine. I will get back to you as soon as I can. If you're having tech issues, let me know. I try to fix them from my end, but I can't always guarantee that I will be able to fix everything. So we will make best of this situation and we will do what we can and we will go from there. So hopefully you guys are all having a good day, and I will hopefully see you next Wednesday.